The necessary restructuring of the European Union. Hello, my name is Edward Sonino. Thanks for tuning in. The British vote to exit the European Union, accompanied by movements and political parties in other countries with the same desire to leave the Union, such as France and even Germany, the Union's most prosperous nation, is proof that the European Union is seriously flawed and urgently needs to be restructured. It must be kept in mind that the European Union had as its initial goal to create a free market for commerce and capital. The European Common Market was the essential condition for enabling the tremendous post-World War II economic boom up until the adoption of the euro in 2000, and must be conserved at all costs. But various serious mistakes have been made which have debilitated the European Union and must be corrected as soon as possible. One of those mistakes was the adoption of the euro by many European nations, in spite of the failure of the euro's precursor, the European Monetary System, or EMS, which tightly linked the exchange rates of the German Deutschmark, the British pound, the French franc, and the Italian lira. The reaction of the Union's political leaders was to assert that the EMS's collapse in 1992 was due to weak penalties for the nations not adhering to the rules, and that to ensure the proper functioning of the common currency in the future, it would suffice to triple the penalties. Those political leaders disregarded the lesson offered by the EMS's failure, that is, that it was not possible over the long term to link currencies of nations with different economic potential, and that penalties would be ineffective. So, in any case, they persisted with the common currency project, their dream being to have a strong, prestigious European currency with the same weight as the dollars. Today, it is indisputable that the euro has been a veritable disaster. In fact, under the euro, there has been by far the longest and deepest recession since World War II, with very high unemployment, at levels never seen before the euro. The euro mistake was accompanied by an austerity policy after the recession hit in 2011, the same catastrophic blunder committed by the United States back in the 1930s, which turned a recession into the Great Depression. Evidently, the European leaders and their economic advisors ignore economic history and have little understanding of economics. The European Central Bank, under Jean-Claude Trichet and subsequently under Mario Draghi, could have cut the recession short with a tax rebate financed through QE, which would have increased consumption so as to stop the recession and prevent unemployment from rising to high levels, but it did not. Instead, it has lowered interest rates to practically zero and even below zero, thinking that such low rates would stimulate consumption financed by credit. That thinking was seriously flawed, given the high level of debt, which combined with the recession deterred bank lending to consumers. Worse still, the ultra-low interest rates practically eliminated interest income, a significant component of personal income, thereby reducing consumer purchasing power. Therefore, for the economic well-being of the European Union, two steps must be taken as soon as possible. First, the European Central Bank under Mario Draghi should distribute a €5,000 tax rebate to each taxpayer of the Eurozone, financed through QE. That would immediately end the recession and lower unemployment. Second, the euro should be abandoned and replaced by the former national currencies. That would ensure that each nation had a currency with a competitive exchange rate. That has not been the case with the euro, which corresponded only to the German economy's competitiveness. An additional important benefit of having their own currency and their own sovereign national bank is that the European nations would be free to distribute their own QE-financed tax rebates any time a recession started, nipping it in the bud before unemployment rose to high levels. It's time the European leaders understood that an economic policy of austerity during recessions is absolutely counterproductive, not to say truly idiotic. After the above economic reforms, that is, the QE finance tax rebate of €5,000 for each Eurozone taxpayer, and the return of the former national currencies replacing the euro, the European Union Parliament should be eliminated along with the entire European Union bureaucracy. They serve no purpose except to cost a fortune and to create subsidies and regulations which hamper the proper functioning of the European economy. There is no need to duplicate parliaments and bureaucracies. It suffices that each nation have a minister for the European Union and that those ministers meet at least once a month for a few days in order to coordinate when necessary and to solve common problems. Additionally, the prime ministers should meet at least once every 2 months for a couple of days. Their conversations should be carried over the internet and on a TV channel dedicated to politics so that the European Union citizens are completely informed of their leaders' decisions and rationales in time for them to object to questionable policies before it is too late. Finally, the European Union should rigorously control legal and illegal immigration. It should adopt an immigration quota system for all underdeveloped nations, as does the United States, and create a network of European schools in those countries in order to offer a good education to the youth who might be interested to immigrate to Europe. The practical, effective way to aid poor nations is to help them develop, not to encourage illegal immigration through weak border controls and weak domestic measures. Furthermore, the European Union should avoid having an incompatible immigration, that is, of persons not wishing to fully integrate in the secular European society, of persons not believing in the principles of democracy and human rights, in particular of women's equal rights, and the prohibition of religious discrimination. Whoever has a religion which discriminates against other religions or against non-believers, which imposes religious censorship, and which does not give women equal rights and imposes on them regulations not applicable to men, such person should not be allowed to immigrate to the European Union. It must be understood that freedom of religion in Europe, as in the United States, does not allow any religion to be intolerant or to violate human rights. In other words, it must be clear for everyone that in Europe no religion is above the law. No religion is allowed to violate human rights or the national laws. All immigrants must respect that the European nations are secular, having had separation of church and state a long time ago, which has been essential for Europe's enormous economic and social progress. It must be clear to them that Europe rejects any interference in politics by any religion. And it must be understood by everyone that tolerating intolerance is not being tolerant. Rather, it is abetting and being complicit with intolerance. It makes no sense for persons to want to immigrate to Europe when they don't share its principles and ideals. In fact, it should be asked why so many immigrants have come to Europe while rejecting its values and ideals. To immigrate to the European Union is a big privilege, and it should be understood as such by every immigrant. That recognition obliges them to respect European laws and customs with no reservations. European Union complacency, naivete, and political correctness with respect to a large incompatible immigration has served to cause enormous social problems and has betrayed the values of human rights. The European Union must forcefully insist on respect for human rights without exceptions. By adopting the right economic and political reforms, the European Union will enjoy enormous sustained economic and social prosperity. From now on, the citizens of the European Union should seek out and vote only for candidates and political parties with clear, detailed, logical platforms which offer real, concrete solutions. No longer for demagogic candidates and parties with vague platforms and promises which will never be kept, as has unfortunately been the case for decades. Better late than never. Thanks for your attention.